Well, it's wonderful to be here with you today, Alex. I simply love your work on strategy. It's refreshing, it's distinctive, it's powerful, insightful. And your book, No Bullshit Strategy, if I'm allowed to use that word, the bullshit one, well, I just have, A Founder's Guide to Gaining Competitive Advantage with a Strategy That Actually Works. It's pithy, and that's a strength. It's hard to write less, and it packs a punch. It's refreshingly good. And also your newsletter, The Hidden Path, hits me straight in the face with content and tips and myth-busting perspectives regularly. So I'm really looking forward to this conversation. I sense we may have some shared views. We may have some different nuances too in how we design and deliver and think about strategy. But so let's get stuck in. But first, welcome to the show.
Thanks very much. Thank you. No, happy to be here. And I can tell you the secret to making something pithy is to just not know a lot. So, if you don't know a lot, then you can't put a lot in there. You just pile it in.
That's a lot, but you see, that's refreshing, and that's a bit of humility there at the beginning, which for future guest note, not always the case, but I actually think you do know, because you do call out some of the real aspects we need to think about when it comes to strategy. So I'm going to challenge you on that in a moment. But let's start with a framing question, as I like to in these conversations. Strategy is a word that is widely used, right? Whether it's in a startup, scale up, corporate, any organization, often attached to an initiative or a role to make it sound special. But many people don't really have a clue about what strategy actually means. How do you think about strategy? What does it mean for you?
So I take it back to such an extreme degree of simplicity that the raw root of it for me is just about supply and demand. Everyone knows what that is, but most business people, how much of their time do they spend thinking about that concept? Well, probably zero, because it's the sort of thing that's so obvious that you don't really have to give it any thought at all. But actually, really, it's the entire game, isn't it? Because if you provide something that's got very high demand and very low supply, you can charge a lot of money for that thing, and business isn't very complicated. So I say the only thing that a business should be thinking about all day, every day, especially the leader of the business, is how can we increase demand and how can we lower supply? So that is like you got maybe 20% of your time spent on a bit of admin, 80% of your time you just spend on that. And if you do that, then essentially that business is going to be pretty bloody successful. If I had to boil strategy back to one thing, I take it pretty much there. And all I'm ever trying to tell people really is that every single business, 99% of businesses have either got a demand problem or a supply problem. They either are selling something that fundamentally people don't really want for whatever reason, or they're selling something that people do want, but they can get it from a million other places. And so it's a commodity, and that creates its own problem. Any problem that the business has on a day-to-day basis, sales, marketing, whatever, is probably can be traced back to one of those two issues. But because the business is probably not thinking strategically, i.e. they're not sort of thinking high enough, they're thinking more down in the operational weeds, they don't realize that this, let's just say for sake of argument, sales problem is actually a strategy problem, which no amount of sales skills or hacks or knowledge or techniques can fix, because the problem exists at a much higher plane. And if you want to get even more sort of woolly about it, but I do think it is actually it's woolly, but it's also helpful. You can think about almost the whole thing about like where your level of gaze is at. So the higher your level of gaze, the more strategic you are. Are you, I read this thing the other day, and it's just like, so it's just top of mind, but I just think it's a really good analogy. Like if you, let's say, have a bakery, like what do you spend your day thinking about? Are you spending your day thinking about the bread and how I can bake amazing bread? And like, that's like really like, that's low level gaze, right? Zero strategy, business is going to fail, even if the bread is amazing. Plenty of bakeries with amazing bread have failed. Or are you thinking high level about, let's say, the bakery industry in general? And how can we disrupt and find opportunity or whatever in the bakery industry? And the amount of time that I spend thinking about bread is like not a minute.
So can I just ask you there, where on that, I mean, it's such an intuitive framing. And I love it. What gets in the way of executives thinking in that way? Are you playing that game? Is it that they haven't been taught that way? Is it their mindset? Is it laziness? And you work with organizations, particularly founders, every day. What are the obstacles to practicing what you just preached?
Well, I mean, there are a hell of a lot, so I'm just trying to pick you the highlights. I would say the two kings that spring to mind are, firstly, there's just a sort of lack of knowledge and understanding thing, not the classic, we all like, no one knows what strategy is. Ha ha, it's a bit of a joke. Why is that? Why does no one know what strategy is? The fundamental reason, I think, in my estimation, is that there is incredible strategy knowledge out there, books, stuff in academia, what you'd learn on a Harvard MBA, whatever. All the information that any business leader, founder, whatever could ever want is there. But because of the incentives of the market, it has all been designed to be as complicated, dense, academic, corporate, dry as possible. So if you are the chief executive of Shell, I would propose that you probably know quite a lot about strategy, and you got people around you who know a lot about strategy because you are the target market of the strategy industry. But if, let's say, you're in charge of not even like a little startup, if you're in charge of even quite a big business, like a 500 million turnover business, let's say, you are not the target of the strategy industry. So that stuff is presented in a way that doesn't cut through. So all of that gold is there, but these founders, these chief executives, they are either not aware that it's there, or they're vaguely aware that it's there, but they just can't be asked to read a boring long book because it's because I'm too busy with running my business, blah blah blah. So you got the knowledge issue. And then, frankly, being real, you've got a personality issue, which I think the most simple way that I can describe this is have you. So I'm not saying it's all about the Myers-Briggs test, but I'm just using this as an analogy. So you're probably familiar with the Myers-Briggs test, and one of the metrics in the Myers-Briggs test is this intuiting versus sensing personality types, which, again, I'm giving you I'm sure this is wrong the way I'm saying it, but the point is still there. This is about, like, are you a person who is sort of essentially zoom in detail kind of person, or are you a person who's a zoom out abstraction kind of person? So archetypal zoom in person would be, let's say, a scientist or an accountant, or someone who can really deal with the tangible detail and they can process a lot of information. Archetypal zoom out person is, let's say, for sake of argument, Richard Branson. Now, obviously, the archetypal zoom out person is a person who thinks strategically naturally, because that's just the way that that's their comfort zone. The problem is that statistically, I can't remember what the number is, but it's far, far more people are on the zoom in side of the equation than the zoom out side of the equation. I think that people who are intuiting, in Myers-Briggs language, is about 10% of the population. And that roughly, I would say, scans with my anecdotal experience. So this is just, do you default to the big picture, low resolution, or do you default to the small picture, high resolution? Vast majority of people default to small picture, high resolution. So for those people, they have to overcome frankly a personality trait to do this, and it's not easy to overcome a personality trait.
Yeah, no, that's fascinating. I agree. I agree with the point. I'm not a massive fan of psychometric tests, but that's a different podcast for another day. But I love the point. And I think people, especially in the earlier stages of their career, I don't think they're taught strategy. It's not it's one of these things you sort of rise up in your career and suddenly you get a promotion, then you're encouraged to be strategic. Whereas I guess what you're saying is actually it's a game you should be playing all the time, whatever your role in the organization is. So I guess it's a mindset and a practice. But as we're thinking about framing strategy, This may be a technical question or just an irrelevant one, and I'm sure, given your style, you'll tell me straight what it is. Some people, where does strategy start and stop? I mean, some people say, well, I'm a visionary person. I do vision stuff, and I'm a strategy person. And then there's others who talk about culture, and they never even talk about strategy apart from using the misattributed Peter Drucker quote. Where for you, where does strategy start and stop? Do you include vision, the ambition for the organization, and do you include culture, or do you consider them separate? And very importantly, does it matter?
So when I said earlier on that my strength is my lack of knowledge, this is actually a pretty good, it wasn't false modesty, it's really true, because this is a pretty good example of like where a lot of these concepts, which are sort of, if you were being negative about them, you'd sort of call them kind of like jargony concepts like vision and mission and culture and whatever. I mean, I know that they're all real things, but like I don't chunk things down in that way. So I don't have any sort of like methodology that strings them together in a way that means that I can give you a direct answer to the question, because I look at things in a much, much more simplistic way, which is simply going back to the supply and demand question and going back to like asking, all right, so the only reason that this business exists, the only reason that any business exists is to generate value for the world, for the market. And the more value you generate, the more money you're going to make. The less value you generate, the less money you're going to make. So every business, therefore, it needs to really understand what value is it there to generate. That's the first and foremost thing. That's, to me, is the fundamental strategic question. That value obviously has to be, to my point earlier on, high demand, low supply. What value is it there to generate? And then everything the rest of the business does is just geared towards generating that value. Now, the way that works on a kind of when you go a click down the hierarchy and you start thinking about the component parts of that, brand, culture, product, whatever, the mix of how that is going to feed up to the value, I think, is quite different in different companies.
Yes.
So it's, I don't have a kind of like a hard and fast rule for what the ingredients are, because to me that is kind of defined by the strategy. So I think that there are some
part. I mean, what you're saying, it's an integrated. It all comes together. It all needs to work together. Whatever terminology and so on. Some people say ambition. What are you there for? What value do you create, and what for, and what are you looking to achieve? All the way through to then, how does that organization get the right combination of supply and demand, and what are the ingredients for that? And that's why I think the beauty of is integrated. And that's why I struggle when people, for example, do work on organizational culture. And I'm a big fan. I've done quite a lot of work on it. And you say, so what are you doing it for? What does it help you achieve? And they sort of say, David, you're missing the point. I'm like, well, sort of Titanic comes to mind, and I don't wish to be insensitive, but it's sort of, you're having a great party on the Titanic and the iceberg's over there, sort of analogy. But let me run on, because, please, yeah, if you want to riff on.
I don't want to like cut you off, but like you just touched on like one of my real bugbears, which I think that the main thing that so many businesses get wrong, and it's like the one thing that it's sort of like the solution for everything, is the hierarchy of information and getting things in the right order, and not having, like, to your point, like the culture thing, like you can't you can't like sort of put culture ahead in the chain of, let's say, for sake of argument, strategy, because the culture only exists to feed the strategy. The culture only exists to support the value creation of the company. So you have to kind of do tasks in a sequence. And what I see with a lot of businesses is that they do tasks out of sequence, and that's why the tasks don't make sense. So branding, like, people will often like, you should never ever do a branding project if it isn't hot on the heels of a strategy project, because what the hell is the branding speaking to? The answer on most branding projects is that it's speaking to nothing, because the company, they don't see they don't see themselves as a hierarchy of information, like a sort of pyramid or whatever. They see themselves as kind of like parallel blobs of information. So today I'm going to work on my brand. Done. Tomorrow I'm going to work on my product.
Yes.
Done. And they don't realize that these things stack like a sort of Russian doll. And so everything becomes so easy if you just understand that like this cascades to this, cascades to this, cascades to this, cascades to this. And then it all makes sense. But nobody seems to, I'm sure there's some academic theory out there about that. I've never come across it. I'm sure it exists. But yeah, that is such a common issue.
No,
and that's
such
why
a
we
powerful
get those
point.
situations.
That's such a powerful point. I mean, my former colleague Paul Lindwand and other authors wrote some books on coherence and what you're describing and the premium you attach with it.
That's it.
And the other thing I'd say about culture, I agree. Although you and I might have alienated some listeners by saying that culture comes after strategy, given the pop culture around that topic. The one thing I agree with you. The only thing I'd say is an understanding of the existing culture can inform, if you like, some of the possibilities you consider when you're framing strategy. But in a way, don't be constrained by it. Don't be constrained by it. But it should serve it.
This is a very technical in the weeds thing that we don't sort of need to get into. But my approach to developing strategy is I sort of very much have the viewpoint that you can't change a business. You can only make it more of what it is already. It's the Dolly Parton quote, find out who you are and do it on purpose. To me, that is strategy. And so to the point about the culture, strategy is above culture. But if you're a business that is developing strategy, inevitably you are going to pull it out of the culture. And what you can't do is like, you can't be like, let's say you can't sort of shift from like a kind of a hardcore aggressive SpaceX culture to a kind and cuddly Deloitte culture or something. That's physically impossible to do that. So the culture gives you a clue, exactly as you say, to what the strategy should be. So in that respect, yes, it's such a subtle point, isn't it? So culture precedes strategy in terms of the fact that it probably exists before your strategy exists, but it is underneath strategy hierarchically.
I agree.
So the time thing and the order thing are not the same thing.
Yeah, that's a great.
That's a bit of garbled. You get my point.
No. You think we may call that self-consciously a technical point, but if you're doing strategy work, this is really important stuff. Because if you look at big organization, they set up work streams, they have teams of people, and they all produce good stuff, but it's like blocks of, and you're okay, how does it actually create? And we'll come on to this. A document, a statement that people can actually use to guide the decisions they take day in, day out. But I'll come back to that in a moment. I want to just talk about, say, the context that executives and founders I know and work with talk about, which, if I generalize, feels in some cases fantastic, great opportunities, but very dynamic, often a lot of complexity out there. These are not buzzwords, but generally complex. Degree of sensitivity around how they engage with their customers and the PR around it. But it just feels dynamically positive or negative, depending on what type of organization you're in and how well you're performing. What is the context that you're seeing? How is that shaping the way that strategy is done compared to, say, more benign periods? Is it the same? You just have to do it with more skill. But how has that shaken up the way that strategy has been done, or hasn't it?
So just so I'm clear, are you saying how does the sort of the positivity or negativity of the moment in time for the business affect the way strategy is done?
Yeah, and all the influences that shape that, yeah.
It's a hard one to answer on the basis that, for the most part, in my opinion, businesses just don't do strategy. So I can't sort of like generalize on how they do it because they don't do it. And I would also go so far as to say, I'm sure that this isn't factually true, but I think it's broadly true. It's sort of spiritually true that businesses who are in a bad spot, by definition, do not do strategy. Because, hang on, let me get this right, because this is another sort of subtle point, but quite an interesting one. When you talk about when you talk about like a really sexy, great case study like Steve Jobs and Apple or something, sometimes people will throw the survivorship bias thing at you, and it's a bit like, and it's a bit like, okay, fine, he did these sort of radical things that other chief executives wouldn't do. But that doesn't therefore mean that if you do those things, you'll be successful. That's just survivorship bias, and it just makes for a sexy story. And that's why we all look at Steve Jobs. But you can't map those things onto general behaviors. This is something that people say when they want to sound clever, but they're actually completely misunderstanding the statistics of this situation. Because actually, like, what we miss is the fact that 99% of companies are doing poorly or failing, and they aren't doing strategy. So when you see these outlier strategic case studies, they aren't actually outliers at all, because almost no businesses are doing strategy. The ones who are actually doing it are almost always successful, and the ones who are kind of operating in these sort of contrarian ways are, statistically speaking, almost always successful. It looks like they are outliers, but that's an optical illusion. It only looks like they're outliers because nobody is bloody doing the thing in the first place. So I'm pretty confident in going out on a limb and saying distressed businesses are distressed because they are not doing this and they have not done it before. It's a real kind of the rich get richer, the poor get poorer kind of thing. I'm not, of course, there will be case studies that individual case studies that refute this. But I think that broadly speaking, what I see is you see founders who from the very get-go with the business are thinking in this way and doing this work, and their business goes up and up and up. And then you get other people who just aren't doing it and whose businesses either fail, or what you also get quite a lot is that you can succeed accidentally. You can succeed non-strategically. There are loads of businesses out there that have succeeded non-strategically. So you can grind, hustle, fluke, whatever your way to quite a lot of success. And everyone will say, isn't that amazing? Doesn't mean that you've done amazing strategy. And then that business will hit some sort of brick wall and they'll all be like, oh, I don't understand what's going wrong. And the reason you don't understand what's going wrong is because you didn't understand what was going right either.
Yes.
You've just been along for the ride. So yes, I don't know if this is an unsatisfying answer to your question, but basically, yeah, I suppose I'm just saying that, like, the strategic process is only ever a positive process done under a kind of positive vibe.
Mm. And when you're working with founders and CEOs who get it and are embedding this strategic thinking and practices right from the get-go, if you had to pick 2 or 3 words that describe the way they think strategically, what words come to mind?
Extreme humility is the absolute king of the words, which, when you think about it, is actually very, very logical, because if you're humble, then you are interested in learning. And when you learn, you grow. And therefore your business grows. So, like, humility equals growth. I mean, it's on a very literal basis. Humility equals growth.
It's fascinating you say that, because humility and the word strategy often don't come together. We have personas or probably you're a branding guy, so I'm going to get it wrong. Probably personas we think about when it comes to strategy of sort of arrogant MBA corporate types, don't we? So that's refreshing to hear the opposite. So humility, extreme humility is one. What 2 words, but one term. What else would they demonstrate?
Incidentally, just on that point, I can't speak to the sort of like the MBA types, and obviously then, but I just want to say, people perceive somebody like Steve Jobs, let's say, or Elon Musk or whatever, as being very kind of arrogant or something like that. But, like, bear in mind, like, Steve Jobs' entire shtick on his Stanford commencement speech and everything, what did he say? Stay hungry, stay curious, or something. Like, just because you're a kind of aggressive leader, it does not mean that you yourself are not curious about the world and wanting to improve and wanting to learn. So, like, and we sometimes get these things mixed up, because when we hear the word humble, we code it for some reason with nice. You don't have to be
I
nice
agree. Absolutely.
and sissy to be humble. I would venture that Elon Musk and Steve Jobs and all these people are extremely humble, even if they are not nice. And so we're mixing characteristics here.
No, that's such a brilliant point. They're so absolutely focused on whatever the problem they're trying to solve or the opportunity they're trying to. It's like, I need to learn, I need to grow, voracious learning, even if some of their day-to-day mannerisms or behaviors may not be nice or worse.
Yeah, I mean, open-minded is maybe a slightly better term, because open-minded, we don't necessarily code with nice quite as much as humble. But anyway, another one is, I know the characteristic, I'm trying to think, is there like a word for it?
Or describe it.
Well, I was going to say propagandistic.
I love that. You should TM that. Yeah. Say more.
So a lot of this is obviously just about repetition and about hammering this stuff into people's heads. You know, people have done like analyses of Jeff Bezos's memos or whatever, and basically he's just a bore, isn't he? He just like keeps on saying the same shit over and over and over again. And I dare say that if you work in Amazon, you're like, oh my God, I get it. Change the record. But that's what you need, because like, what does that show you? Firstly, people have to be told something a million times before they even half get it. That's just this classic advertising theory, isn't it? How many times do you have to see an ad before whatever? So the same thing applies internally within the business. And then also, like, if they're propagandistic, it means that they correctly understand the nature of their position, which is that they are not there to do the work. They are there to set the direction and make sure that everyone else is pushing in that direction. So I'm being a little bit facetious here, but all a founder should really be doing after a business is like gone over a certain quite modest size threshold is they should just be wandering around telling people the same shit that they told them yesterday. And when they see somebody who's aligning with that shit, very good. When they see someone who's not aligning with that shit, bam. So it's, I heard something, I can't remember I heard this. It was about some founder or something. Maybe it was even a big famous one. I can't remember. He'd literally walk around his company with cash in his pocket, and he would put people on the spot and he would ask them, I'm not sure exactly what the question was, but it amounted to asking them, what is the strategy of this business, or something to that effect. And if they answered it correctly, he gave them $5. Like, that is not stupid. That is great.
That's and very interesting. If a typical CEO walked around there, if they were working in an office, which many of them are, walked around their own execco or their leadership team and did the same exercise, I bet they'd have plenty of money back in their pocket by the end of the day. But communication, I mean, you're a brilliant communicator, you're a brilliant writer. I want to give people a little bit of a tease to some of your work, whether it's in the book or the strategy system that you've launched relatively recently at the time of this recording. When you read a strategy, you actually read it, out loud, or you read it somewhere. And so, what should it include? Just give us a taster of that.
So, I think that, well, I can tell you that if you want to see the world's best example of a real strategy, as in not like a hypothetical one that someone like me would kind of summarize, but an actual thing that really happened, you Google the Elon Musk's Tesla secret master plan blog post from 2006, which the first 4 paragraphs, he basically says, here is Tesla's strategy. And then he just writes it. And it's flawless on every single level. Stylistically, content-wise, it is the archetypal strategy. And it's also incredible how everything that he lays out in that is exactly what happened. So, it's incredibly sort of future predicting. As well, and it's so simple because there's not one number in there. There's not one piece of research. There's not one piece of analysis. There is literally nothing other than a point of view about the market. And well, what everyone's doing wrong in this market is X, so we are going to do Y, and that will result in Z. And then what do you know? That's exactly what happened. Every single business on the planet needs to have a document that this 4 paragraphs, not effing hard.
Yeah.
Well, it is hard. It is hard, but it's not like it's not a big labor. And people think it has to be a big labor. Obviously, it's not a big labor. But you have to. It's just something like that. And honestly, I don't know how businesses even operate without a couple of paragraphs like that sitting right at the core of the business. So structurally, if you want to know how to do it, and I talk about this in the book, and then my whole kind of the strategy shortcut system product that you mentioned is built out around from this. The structure is basically always going to be something along the lines of, here's the status quo in this market. Here's why this sucks. Here's something that we've noticed that no one else has noticed. Therefore, we are going to do such and such a thing, which is going to result in such and such value for the customers. Right? So they're always that kind of narrative flow. Yeah. And the crux of it, I mean, what are the key parts there? The first bit is obviously, you know how I said you've got to look up, right? So you've got to have a high view. So the first bit, you're not talking about you're not talking about the customer. I also think people focus actually too much on the customer. That's another thing. I'm more interested in talking about the state of the market, the state of the category. So to begin with, you're talking about the category and you're finding a flaw in it. Then you have to put in some sort of secret. There has to be some sort of proprietary information, so to speak, which is not like, like it's just a point of view is what it is. It's something that you think that the other companies don't think, something that you think and the other companies would disagree with. Just to give you the example of the one that is in the Tesla thing, the whole crux of that strategy was recognizing that people were trying to sell EVs on a kind of economical standpoint, because there's something intuitive about an EV is sort of cheap to run, and it's a little sort of city runaround whiz kind of thing. And then Elon Musk made the very coherent point that he's like, this doesn't make any bloody sense because EVs are incredibly expensive. Actually, EVs should be luxury sports cars. They shouldn't be little hatchback city runarounds. Yes, the technology lends itself much better to a high-end car than to a low-end car. And the whole market was trying to think about low-end cars. And he's like, this is stupid. Early adopters are only going to buy a really sexy, fast car, which is why the first Tesla car was the Tesla Roadster, a supercar. So that was his fundamental kind of disagreement with the category. And this is the problem that I think most companies have, most founders have, is that if you really interrogate them, they don't have an original thought in their head. They don't have anything where they disagree with their competitors. And when you speak to founders and you say, tell me something you disagree with your competitors about, they'll respond with some sort of bullshit like, well, our competitors think that it's okay to rip off the customers, but we don't. And it's like, you can't even begin to like the way the self-deception and the delusions with a statement like that. The rule of thumb that you need to apply is whatever you've written, would your fiercest competitor like acknowledge that what you've said is true? So like if Elon Musk says, he doesn't put it this way, but if he basically says other cars are focusing on economy, other EVs are focusing on economy, we're gonna like focus on luxury and performance. Like the competitor is not going to come in and say that's not true, because obviously it's just a bald statement of fact. And they could disagree with him and they could say, no one's going to buy your $150,000 sports car, Elon. That's why we haven't done it. We think you're stupid. And he's like, well, we'll have to agree to disagree and let's see what happens. So that is what's born of a good faith disagreement with your category. And that I'd say that good faith disagreement is the single most important and most rare thing in this whole game, because nobody is prepared to have a dangerous opinion.
Wow, I love that. I'm keen to turn the tables on you, as I do with all the guests, to see how they practice what they preach. To use that term for the second time. So you have your own business, Basic Arts. I mentioned your newsletter book and the system, and no doubt there's other things in the pipeline too. What have you most enjoyed and found most challenging in applying the strategy you've just been talking about eloquently to your own business?
So it's been very hard change, and I see this in a lot of small businesses, when like one person businesses are not real businesses for the most part. Even if they're quite successful, they're sort of like glorified freelancers, and they're not really doing something genuinely entrepreneurial. So getting over that hump is very hard for one person businesses, and it was very, very hard for me too. So I was like a jobbing strategy consultant for like 6 years or something like that, 7 years. And I can't really say that there was any strategy behind what I was doing. But now I'm trying to sort of like move beyond that and sort of break through into more sort of real business territory. And so essentially my strategy is that, well, you know how I said to you before about how you got this amazing, the general strategic principles, which nobody owns, nobody invented them. They're like laws of nature. You can only observe them. The general strategic principles, I think, are amazing, incredibly powerful. You've got no business being in business if you don't know them. But because of the things I said before about like the incentives of the market being up to the top corporates, not down, this stuff, it just does not trickle through. It just does not trickle through. So what I want to do, mission-wise, is I want to like put out there a sort of form of strategy which is sufficiently universal that every single founder on the planet, no matter how mediocre, whatever small their business is, can get the gist and start making better, higher value giving decisions. So the analogy that I use is I call it the Starbucks of strategy. I'm not interested in making the best strategy, the best coffee. I wouldn't say that I'm the best strategist in the world. You could probably hire someone who's going to get you better results for your business than I am. I don't know. In the same way as that, like, you can easily get a better coffee than Starbucks. But what Starbucks did is they didn't raise the ceiling, they raised the floor. So all of those businesses out there who have got a 1 out of 10 strategy, I want them to have a 5 out of 10 strategy. And the difference between that 1 out of 10 strategy and a 5 out of 10 strategy spread out over all these businesses is absolutely seismic. And it's a hell of a lot bigger than the difference between a 9 out of 10 strategy and a 10 out of 10 strategy.
That's very powerful.
So everything that I do is just about kind of like universalizing and massifying these principles as much as I can do. And the sacrifice that I have to make, and the way that I think that other strategy professionals would like, my good faith disagreement is that, to be perfectly blunt, I dumb this shit down. And I do that because, you know, done is better than perfect. And, you know, I'll get people kind of criticizing my work sometimes in a sort of like, well, actually, that's not quite true sort of thing. And the criticisms are always completely valid. But I'm like, you're missing the point, because like your thorough, rigorous assessment of this issue may be true, but no one's going to listen to it and no one's going to do it. It's much better that they do a semi-good job of it and they actually do something than that they get lost in the weeds of what is right and what is wrong.
I get it and I buy it, and that's very powerful. And you've answered one of the key questions at this stage of the Answer It or the Line podcast around what's the impact on the world you want to have around you. And you've answered that question, the sort of 1 to 5. And look, I mean, you're prolific in the quality and the and I'd say quality as well, quality of what you put out and the followership you've gained, and I hope monetization that will flow with that too. When you're having your best day possible, it may even be today, but your best day possible, you know, when you're just, everything's flowing, you know, the juices are flowing, writing is just coming off the page, having great conversations with founders, including having a great conversation with me. What helps you the most to achieve such brilliance?
I don't know if this is a good answer, but it's just what sort of springs to mind. I suppose that, like, yeah, the brutal answer is I quite like just being the center of attention and like pontificating on stuff like this. And I find it very energizing. And I like doing podcasts. I like doing group calls. I like doing speaking engagements. That's what I like. I could care less about actually doing the work, as in like the strategy work, quite frankly. I would like to get to a point where I don't think it's ever fully happen. I'd like to get to a point where I'm kind of doing no actual like strategy work. Maybe that would be a bad idea because then I would lose the edge and then the content wouldn't be so good. It's the media. It's the media work. It's the media work that I really like because you said before that I'm good at communication. I suppose that's actually what I like. I actually like communication, if that's a thing that you can like more than
and you're very, very good at it. What I was also keen to get at is what are the ingredients? You said before the call, you've done some exercise before. Some guests talk about exercise or diet or being on your own, working with teams. The sort of what are the practices or habits that help you when you are? Is there anything in particular? Or you just do it.
No, I don't have much in. I mean, it's something that I often think about. That it's not something I should. It's something that I should be more intentional about. Basically, I think that I go to London 2 days a week to get the vibe because working from home, you just don't get the vibe. So I think if I'm if I'm on the move, despite all my Starbucks spiel, I'm a real huge coffee snob. If I'm on the move with like absolute 10 out of 10 grade coffee, speaking to people, I think via speaking. That's when I'm in my zone. I love to be traveling, not like traveling like going on holiday. I mean, obviously I like that too, but I mean quite literally moving from point A to point B. Then then you just feel like you're living and you feel like you're having some form of like adventure. It's not exactly going to discover new lands, but we don't really have that option anymore. So it's a sort of second best or 10th best version of the same thing.
So what is your 10 out of 10 coffee?
So there's my local coffee shop in London. I'll give them a plug. They're really great. Is called, because they've also got a good name, which is Fuck Coffee.
Great.
And so great name, great coffee. I like the fact, I know that this is very unecological, but they don't have any porcelain cups. They only serve in paper cups. And for me, I think that coffee in a paper cup is much better than coffee in a proper cup. That's one of my niche little coffee snob opinions. So I appreciate that. And I'm a cappuccino guy, and they're not the only people who do this, but they'll pour a bit of milk in, then they'll put the chocolate in, and then they'll pour the milk on top of the chocolate rather than putting the chocolate on at the end. I think that's very important, so the chocolate is integrated. And then the best thing, although this slightly depends on which barista you get there, they get the foam. It's so glassy, the foam, that if you can imagine, you've got the top of the cup, and then the foam, it kind of bubbles over the top of the cup. Like when you get like a water droplet that's sort of holding itself together. So they do that with the foam. So the foam is higher than the rim of the cup. And to me, that is it. That is it. Because I'm probably more into the milk than I am into the coffee, actually, really. So I'm always like judging the foam. It can't be, if there's a bubble in the foam, I'm like, get this crap out of my face. It has to be pure glass. Oh, I love it. Love it.
Listeners, viewers, did you notice the last minute or so? That's where we saw the sort of razor sharp focus, the attention to quality and detail, and your true passion. Forget strategy. Well, that was a strategic moment. Hey, Alex, that was a wonderful conversation. I really appreciate you sharing your wisdom, calling out some home truths, making strategy real. I love your focus and your endeavor. And if I can support it in every way, I will do. Obviously, this podcast being the first salvo. Where can people find out more about your work online?
So obviously they can follow me on sort of any of the socials, not Facebook, but the other ones. LinkedIn is the main one, but you got to search Alex M.H. Smith, because obviously Alex Smith is not a Googleable name. And then the newsletter would be the obvious thing. So if you just go to like basicarts.org, and you'll see the kind of, you can obviously just sign up right there. And then beyond that, obviously there's a whole world of like mass strategy products if you get to that point. The book, which, like I say, is very short, 138 pages. So, read it in one sitting. And then there's the strategy shortcut system, which is obviously a sort of DIY strategy program come tool, which is certainly, if you are, well, actually, no, some people go on there who are like practitioners, like us, just to sort of, you can take the material and you can just use it with your clients. I don't care. Or, of course, if you actually have a business, then you can obviously put your business through the meat grinder.
Yes.
And see what comes out.
Wonderful. Well, what a stimulating conversation. I feel like going in to get a cup of coffee, and I now know what to really ask for when I go there. Thank you for that provocation and stimulation. That was another edition of Lancefield on the Line. I do hope you enjoyed this episode as much as I did. Please do check out the other episodes in the series. Sign up to the YouTube channel, to the podcast if you're feeling especially generous. Give us a 5-star rating. And Alex, thank you ever so much again.
Thanks a lot. That was fun.